a lot easier now than when they were building it.
No, it means it's always been created by God.
Technology can produce things that are cheaper. A tree falling in the forest with no one around. So, am I a heretic?
What does all things visible and invisible mean?
It's very fortunate that this question came up next, because I think this was something I was interested in asking about on the previous question when we were defining God. So one of the questions I encounter a decent bit on the internet is how you define existence. I run into some materialists who argue some really radical points, in my viewpoint, that things that don't have matter don't exist. And to me, it would appear that things like heat and light, which are measured to be not matter, do exist because they're measurable. Mm-hmm. So I think we have evidence to believe that things that are invisible exist. Something else that comes to mind is, why use good materials to build a beautiful church? I think you want to make a beautiful church to do several things: direct our attention towards God, honor God, glorify Him, and also practical examples of having images of saints and stories. You have the Stations of the Cross in every chapel. And in modern times, we could very easily replicate some of the greatest cathedrals of the world much more rapidly. I mean, obviously, it's still an incredible challenge to rebuild Notre Dame in Paris, but it's a lot easier now than when they were building it originally. And we could replace it with materials that look the exact same but are much cheaper. And it really, very reasonably, could make no difference. I mean, we're approaching a time when technology can produce things that are cheaper and perform the exact same. But I think the church wouldn't use such materials because it's not about making the most economical church in pursuit of beauty. It can function the exact same and from the outside be perceived as almost precisely identical, especially if it's something way up high, you know? You're not really interacting with it. Why does the painting need to be hand painted by someone? You know, why couldn't you use a stencil and fill the whole thing? And you very easily could, or robots and whatnot. And in a lot of situations, we do need to. There's plenty of churches that don't have the capital to build them, but when we do have it, we do. And I think that speaks to exactly what this question is talking about, is that it's not visible that the material is any different, but it is different, and you know that it's different, and God knows that it's different. And I think that's a lot of what the visible and invisible in the prayer refer to, and I think it's also a great metaphor for the Eucharist as well, because observably it is still the same, but it is different. So, am I a heretic?
No, Charles, you're not a heretic.
That's great.
That's a good thing. But I think you're getting at what the church is getting at, in that there are things that we can understand and perceive with the human eye, which is visible. There are things that we can understand without the benefit of the human eye. Heat, can't see heat. You can sort of feel heat, touch heat, but it's not visually observable. And in that sense, it's invisible. The same is true for kind of the analogy of, you know, as a stone is replicated to look like stone. The human eye perceives one thing and may perceive them as the same, but it doesn't mean that they are the same. So let me suggest, if we take your framework and back it up just a little bit, that the question of God creating all things visible and invisible it's less about that which is visually observable and not observable, but it's really more about that which is known and unknown. So, for example, God created the atom, the substance of life, the building block of life. That atom was invisible to humankind for millennia, and only until recently do we understand what it looks like, how it operates, and can observe a cell, for example, is a good reason. Like, we have only been able to visibly observe what a cell looks like in the past 100 years. Does that mean it was not created by God? No, it means that it's always been created by God. It's always in part God's existence. Our ability to observe it and know it and understand it has changed, but our ability to know something isn't what limits God's creation.
So, I don't mean to oversimplify, but it's something akin to a tree fallen in the forest with no one around is definitely fallen.
Right. Exactly. So God creates all things. that which is known to us, and that which is unknown to us. Now, the benefit of hindsight is that we can easily talk about cells and atoms and all these sorts of things because we've discovered them. What's harder for us to understand is what we haven't discovered yet.
Right.
What 100 years from now might be readily apparent to someone that's not readily apparent or understandable to us, but is still part of God's creation. So to say that God created all things visible and invisible means even the stuff that we don't know about yet, even the stuff we don't quite understand or grasp, even the stuff we don't have the ability to actually see, all of that is still within the realm of God's creation. And is still part of his creation. And is still part of his life. Because what he has created transcends what we know and what we can observe and what we can understand. Which I think is a fundamental statement of truth every time we say the creed. Let me take that to the church analogy. That's a very important question, a good question. There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, there are plenty of examples of churches kind of being built using different materials because it's more cost effective. I mean, the Basilica is actually a prime example of this. And if you go to all the churches that look like the Basilica in France, they're all made of stone. They all took centuries to build. They're all pretty cold and they're all well decorated, but the expense was significant, both in time and money. The Basilica is made to look like those churches, but it's made of plaster and wood and paint. So in fact, I was just at a beautiful church this weekend, St. Hyacinth in Chicago, and if you look into it, when you walk in, it looks like it's made of marble, but what it is just painted plaster to look like it's marble. So, like, we have certainly used that tactic before.
Of course.
I think what's important to say is to always understand what the object and goal of the space is. There are times when it's more fitting to use a more expensive and time-consuming method of production and labor. Certainly, the architects and engineers at Notre Dame de Paris are dedicated to using the original methods for any number of important reasons. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that something that's made with more cost-effective materials is somehow beneath the Lord. And we just want to be thoughtful about making sure that we're using them in a manner that helps the human soul glorify God and come to know God.
That makes sense. Thank you.